Okay, so ready to dive into something kind of wild. We're looking at, well, imagine a completely made up alien invasion, but, and here's the thing, it's made to feel totally real. Like we've got pronouncements from, you know, everybody, world leaders, tech people, even the Pope, all reacting to this big, fake global crisis.
And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just some random story. It's like a masterclass in how propaganda actually works, disguised as this big alien thing. We've seen this playbook before through history, and it's been effective.
Right. It's like, what's that saying? History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. Like you've got Dr. Greer, the UFO guy, right in the thick of it, saying the whole thing is staged, orchestrated, he says, by some shadowy group, elites, corporations. He even calls out Lockheed Martin, Boeing. It's giving very much conspiracy thriller.
And that's exactly how they weaponize fear. It plays on those anxieties we already have, right? Our thing with UFOs, government conspiracies, all that. Suddenly, boom, you've got an enemy, organizations to blame, and that fear, well, it becomes a tool.
Wild, right? And it gets more intense. We're talking about these weirdly similar responses from superpowers, almost like they're reading from the same script. Everyone's all about global unity, stay calm. It's actually kind of chilling how fast we go from unexplained lights to full-blown invasion.
And that speed, that's deliberate. No time for, thinking things through. Just panic, which, let's be honest, makes people way easier to manipulate.
For sure. And just to pile on, you've got social media blowing up. There's this one tweet, some guy, Astro Alex, really captures the vibe. Uncharted territory, folks. Buckle up. Hashtag unknown frontiers. I mean, poor Astro Alex is probably just caught up in it, but it shows how fast misinformation spreads now.
Totally. That tweet, intentional or not, becomes part of the echo chamber, amplifies the message, solidifies the narrative. Social media, powerful tool. Both ways, right?
Like a runaway train, picking up speed, picking up passengers, and then it gets even wilder. The WHO's out there with these warnings about mass hysteria, but at the same time, the Pope's calling for global prayer. It really hits home how big this would feel, even if it was fake. Makes you think, what would you do if aliens actually showed up?
That's the question, right? And that contrast, that's another tactic. You've got logic on one side, face on the other, creates chaos, uncertainty, leaves people vulnerable. But hold on, let's step back. The big question is why? Why stage an alien invasion? What's the end game?
Okay, yeah, let's get into that. Why go through all this? What's the motive? And who's really benefiting from all this?
Well, Dr. Greer, remember, he's convinced this is all a setup. He thinks it boils down to control, resources, tech, even people. And looking back at history, it's not that far-fetched.
Good point. We've seen it before, haven't we? Governments, powerful people, using fear, making up threats just to hold on to power. But in this alien invasion scenario, how does it actually work? Who are the puppet masters, so to speak?
Well, there are hints about a familiar player, the military-industrial complex. In this scenario, it's companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, the ones Dr. Greer was suspicious of. They're the saviors, the ones with all the answers, the solutions to this alien problem. Solutions that conveniently require tons of money for the military and fancy new technology.
It's like a messed up self-fulfilling prophecy. Create the problem, then boom, you've got the solution. A solution that makes certain people very rich and powerful, cynical, but it feels familiar. There's a historical parallel here, right?
Absolutely. The Cold War, constant threat of nuclear annihilation, kept everyone scared, which meant, guess what? Huge military buildup, less freedom, all for security. Or more recently, the War on Terror, which had similar effects on things like surveillance and our freedoms.
So they're using fear to control us, but also to distract us from something else, something maybe way worse. What are they trying to hide?
Exactly. And that raises a crucial question for you, the listener.
Huh.
Who benefits most from fear, and what are they so desperate to keep hidden? It's a chilling thought, but one worth considering as we dig deeper into how this fake invasion is built.
Okay, so they've got their motive, they've got these powerful players. But how do they actually pull it off? Convincing the entire world that, aliens have landed. That's a big leap.
And that's where this source material gets really interesting. They've got this whole staged invasion laid out step by step, like a how-to guide for mass deception. And get this, it starts with something they call long-term societal priming.
So we're talking, they're saying we've been prepped for this without even realizing it. Like all those alien movies, TV shows, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Think about it. War of the Worlds, Independence Day, all those documentaries. We've been fed this alien narrative for decades. Some are friendly, some not so much. And over time, that line between what's real, what's just a story, it gets blurry.
Making us more likely to believe it when someone's like, hey, I've got proof of aliens.
Right, exactly. And it goes beyond just movies. The source material also talks about these, like, calculated leaks of so-called UFO encounters.
Yeah.
They come from these supposedly credible people, like pilots, government officials, but there's never any real evidence. Just enough mystery to make people wonder.
So it's like planting that seed. Maybe there is something to it, which then makes the whole, unexplained lights thing, part of their staged invasion, even more believable.
Right. And that leads us to stage 2 of their little playbook, blue beam technology.
Yeah.
Now we're moving from, like, subtle hints to full-on sensory overload.
Okay, blue beam. Sounds kind of intense. What are we talking about here?
Basically, picture this. Super advanced tech that projects crazy realistic images directly onto the sky. Like massive holograms of alien spaceships appearing over cities all over the world.
Hold on, holograms. Is that even possible on that scale?
Projecting stuff directly onto the sky like that on a huge scale? Yeah, that's still kind of in the works. But the tech behind it, it's not as sci-fi as you might think. Think about those projection mapping things, laser shows, even those virtual concerts with holographic performers.
Yeah.
It's using what we have, but in new, kind of creepy ways.
So they could use something like that to basically project these crazy, realistic alien spaceships, cause worldwide panic. I mean, people would freak out.
Oh, absolutely. Global freak out. People wouldn't know what was real, who to trust, where to go. And in all that chaos, all that fear, well, that's when they're the most vulnerable.
Okay, that's already terrifying. But it gets worse, right? The source material mentions blue beam is just the beginning.
Yeah, unfortunately. They get us all looking up, scared, and that's when they hit us with stage 3, false flag attacks.
False flag attacks. So we're not just talking holograms, we're talking actual attacks, and they're going to blame it on the aliens.
That's the playbook. Using advanced tech, but human-made, to make it look like the aliens are attacking. Explosions, targeted hits, maybe even messing with the weather, all to make it seem like a hostile alien force.
That's pretty dark. But why go through the trouble? If they've already got the holograms, the fear, why not just stop there?
Because to really justify a global response, to grab power, to build their new world order, like the source material says, they need an enemy, a real threat that brings everyone together. They need a war, even if it's one they start themselves.
So it's like they need us to want their help, want their solution, even if it means giving up our freedom. And it all comes down to whether we believe what we're told, especially when we're already scared.
Exactly. And that is why understanding how these tactics work, even in this whole made-up alien invasion, is so important. Because in the end, it's not really about aliens, is it? It's about power, control, what some people will do to get it.
So we're talking fear, we're talking tech, we're talking good old-fashioned lying to create this whole alien invasion. Pretty intense, even if it's, made up. But let's say this IS the playbook. How do we fight back? How do we stop ourselves from being tricked, especially when it's this good?
That's the big question, right? And it's tough. There's no easy answer. But for me, it starts with awareness. Knowing the tactics, getting the motives, and just being a little skeptical, especially with stuff that's like pushing your buttons.
So like you said before, don't just believe everything you hear, even if it sounds like it's from someone important, right?
Exactly. Always got to ask, who benefits from this story?
Yeah.
What are their biases? Are they trying to, I don't know, sell me something? Could be a product, an idea, even just their own version of reality,
Yeah. And that's where critical thinking comes in. Not just who's saying it, but what they're saying, actually looking at the information.
100%. Look for holes in the story, things that don't add up. Don't be afraid to do your own research. Check different sources. See what other people are saying, even if you don't agree with them at first.
And something else from the source material that stuck with me was how important it is to watch out for emotional manipulation, which makes sense. They want us to be scared, panicked, maybe even kind of amazed by those holograms spaceships.
Right. Fear, anger, those emotions, they mess with your thinking, make you do impulsive stuff, fall for easy answers to hard problems. And it's not just the bad stuff. Even hope, especially when things are bad, can make you ignore the downsides.
So basically, take a breath, don't just react. Look at the information clearly, logically.
Exactly. Which, let's be real, isn't easy these days. We're constantly bombarded with information. But the more you practice thinking critically, the better you get at it. The better you are at navigating this crazy world.
Like building up a defense against manipulation. You know how it works. It's harder to trick you.
Exactly. And that's why, even though these aliens are fake, it's a good exercise, Makes you think about your own weaknesses, question what you believe, and practice those critical thinking skills. Those are important.
Absolutely. So if we had to boil this down, one piece of advice to take away from all this, what would it be?
Don't be afraid to be skeptical, but don't be cynical. Be discerning, but don't check out. Stay curious, keep asking questions, and never forget. You have the power to think for yourself.
Because knowledge is power, especially in a world where it's getting harder and harder to separate truth from fiction. And that brings us to a final thought for you to consider. If someone could pull off a hoax this big, this convincing, what does that say about us? About how we consume information, about how we think critically? It's a question worth asking, a challenge we all face together. So until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and thanks for joining us on this deep dive.